Thanks for joining me. That's my cue to Sammy, my editor, that we've started. We met a very, very long time ago. The first question I always ask my guests is, tell me the story of how we met. And the funny thing is that off camera, we've been talking for 10 minutes trying to piece together how we met. Tell me about that. I guess we're probably going to have to recap everything that we just said for the sake of the recording, but it's been a while.
It's been a minute. It's been a long minute. We met sometime in the early 2000s, probably in the 2006 to 2007 range, when I was working for a small PR agency called Krause Taylor and Associates, run by the fabulous Barbara Krause and Betty Taylor, and we were doing PR for Strata. And that's how we met. And actually, I don't think we met in real life. We only met over the phone and on
That's the
LinkedIn.
bizarre thing. I was convinced that we'd met in person. First of all, it was like, oh, I'm sure I met Shanee in person at South by Southwest. And then it was like, no, it was that event in LA. And it turns out there was never any in-person thing. And yet we've had this kinship for going on, oh God, like going close to 2 decades nearly, I guess you could say. 17 years.
That is terrifying.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. I'm
And
fine. You're fine. We're fine.
right. Well, listen, I got a whole bunch of questions prepared, of course. And I mean, we could play catch up probably for a full hour, but I'm going to hit you with some tough questions. But first, I want to spread a little love here and add just a bit of context. Your career, if it was a startup, is a unicorn. You are the CMO at Crunchbase. And as such, you deal with a lot of tech startups, of course, marketing plans. Right out of the gate, I want to ask you, what examples are you seeing right now of companies that are doing great marketing, and what is it that they're doing well?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and I think the reason why it was hard for me is that I don't ever look at a company like full across the board, all of their marketing. I tend to look for specific things that companies are doing well, and it tends to be the things that I care about in the moment. So, like right now, we're in the process of reviewing our pricing and packaging. So I'm looking at a lot of different companies' pricing and packaging pages, and I'm seeing which companies are doing well there. Like, for example, we have a product-led growth business where a lot of our revenue comes from people who can self-serve buy, and a subset of our revenue comes from people who want to engage with our sales team. So I'm looking for other companies that have that kind of hybrid model of a little bit self-serve, a little bit direct sales. So I'm looking at companies like Notion or Asana or Atlassian, and just seeing how they're going about it right now. And then I'm also looking at companies that are doing different landing page strategies. It's something that we care about right now. And I was trying to look for what's a company that's just doing it all great. And I don't think there is one company that's doing it all great, because right now is a time for everybody to pull back on budgets. So they can't afford to do it all great. And I think that's actually very smart. That's my dream world, is a world where we stop trying to be everything for everyone and we just pick a lane. So if others are trying to find good examples of companies, I would just look for what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then Google good, good example, or ask ChatGPT, whoever you want to ask. And there's usually somebody who's written about somebody doing that thing that you care about really well.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying maybe instead of spreading yourself too thin with a whole bunch of things, pick one thing that you can excel at. I actually want to go off book here. I got a list of questions. I know you've read them, but talking about that hybrid model a little bit, that seems increasingly common just because some people need that white glove, handheld sales experience. Sometimes maybe it's a larger enterprise account that requires that level of attention. But of course, product-led growth is like the hot thing right now. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody would love for people just to hit that buy now button and subscribe to their product without having to speak to a salesperson.
Yeah.
Is that hybrid model a good way to go assuming you have the resources to handle both, building a self-serve and and I guess the more like product demo environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to what is your product like and who are your buyers like. So for me, the greatest analogy is the supermarket. There are some people who would rather die than go to the full service checkout line, and they will do
Hmm.
everything they can. You're seeing them with a cart full of groceries, just scanning and bagging. And you're like, that's going to take you way longer, but they just do not want to deal with talking to anybody. And then you see, you have an elderly person who's does not know how to use technology, and sometimes the only socialization they get is at the checkout counter. And so they'll go in with a stick of gum and just have a whole chit chat with Jan behind the register. So it's very much about both what your product requires, but also what your buyer requires. So yes, I think in a perfect world, you try to do as much as you possibly can with the automation of self-serve, of product-led growth. But having that option of the white glove experience can be very valuable for the people who either need it or want it. And in fact, I'm thinking about it less of just like what's the pre-sale experience and more about how do you support your customer throughout their journey. And so I think there's like that same logic of do as much as you can with automation everywhere throughout their life cycle, but then strategically place that white glove experience where it could either add value for them or add value for your business. So it could be like, hey, you've been using the product for 6 months. Notice you haven't logged in a couple weeks. Would you like to hop on the phone with one of our product experts? Not
Excellent.
everybody will take you up on it, but some will.
Right. And the people who want it and need it will, as you say. Shifting gears a little bit, what is the biggest mistake that, I specifically deal with early stage companies. So, the folks with smaller budgets, they need to buy growth, but they don't have tons of resources. Like you said, budgets are tight, people are pulling back. What's the biggest mistake that early stage companies make with their marketing?
I think focusing on the wrong part of the funnel can be really deadly for a whole startup, not just for a marketing team. And I think when you're at that stage of company, like the names of teams almost don't matter. Like titles and teams don't matter until you're bigger and later stage. And what you're trying to do is like really define swim lanes. At an early stage, it's just a bunch of people who are trying to prove the concept and get the company to the next stage. And I think a thing that could get in the way of getting to the next stage is having the wrong focus or no focus in any department. So for marketing, I think it's a question of understanding your funnel and saying, where is our most urgent need? And I think the most frequent mistake I see is people try to go too far into brand, like too far up funnel when it's just too early. Like really what you need to start in the beginning is get a handful of customers who can give you feedback that will make the product better and give you the insight you need to go find more of those people. Like you want to find the right fishing hole.
Are you suggesting that like direct sales is a good place to start?
I don't think it's a bad idea. Like, I think in the very beginning, non scalable tactics are the right way to go because what you're trying to do is like, you're essentially like the person on the beach with a metal detector and you're trying to find where the jewels are. And you can't just spray and pray across the whole beach. You do have to do some like non-scalable things and say, oh, this part of the beach is where I find the most jewels. So now is where I'm going to focus on bringing in more of a team of people. So whether it's, oftentimes your founder is your first salesperson, like what they're trying to do is convince people that this is the right thing for them and find the right people where he doesn't have to do or she doesn't have to do or they don't have to do that much convincing.
That is such a spectacular answer, and I expect that it's going to become a clip on because that was perfect. In getting to that traction, obviously the companies that raise capital are having a more difficult time these days. There's bootstrapped companies, of course, but then there's the ones that have designs on venture capital. What can you tell me about what investors are looking for at the various funding stages, starting with pre-seed, and maybe take us through like pre-seed, seed, A? What are people looking for? What are the marks that people need to hit in order to get interest from investors at those stages?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky because I get the perspective of working at Crunchbase, which gets the kind of first hand knowledge of where funding is going, but I also get perspective, I advise for a firm called Hatchet Ventures that specializes in kind of providing the advisory services that early stage startups need and breaking the VC model from what it is today, from like changing it from more of that predatory to more about how do you help these early stage, underrepresented, underfunded founders get where they're going. So I'm getting to see kind of like the people who are in the process of trying to find funding and the people who have received funding. And I think the earlier stage you are, the more likely it is that you haven't sold anything. So really what the investors are investing in is you, the founder. And so it's a matter of how do you show that you are a trustworthy person that they can, hitch their cart to your horse. So anything, oftentimes what I'll see is founders are in a lovely way, very humble, but like that is not the time to be humble. That is the time to dig deep and see what are all the things that make you unique, you valuable, you likely to succeed, and just put that in front of people. Because that's your third party recommendation, right? Like a later stage company, when you're trying to sell your product, you're bringing in third party reviews, you're showing what your G2 crowd scores are. At the beginning, when you don't have a product, you are the product and you need to show what your G2 crowd scores are. So I think that's one big thing. The earlier stage you are selling yourself. As you get a little bit more advanced, it's a matter of how do you prove that your thing could become a big thing. So being able to show metrics starts to become more valuable. And one caution I would give is, I've helped with a lot of pitch decks. Don't just put metrics in your pitch deck, because what a VC is trained to do is you use pattern recognition to sort the wheat from the chaff. And as soon as they see numbers, that's going to trigger all of their pattern recognition, and they're going to be looking for a problem. Anybody who's ever a manager, that is like a thing that's in your mind where your direct report will give you something and you're immediately looking for a problem, which is not necessarily a healthy thing to do, but it's pretty natural. And so you don't want to give them a reason to say no too soon. You want to guide them to yes. And then when you get to the numbers, the story that you showed before the numbers should justify those numbers. You can't make up numbers. Your numbers are what they are, but you need to be able to explain why your numbers are what they are. I do see that there's been a change in which numbers the VCs care about. And I think, we've seen a lot of people talking about this. It used to just be about what's your year-over-year gross new ARR increase. I think that has changed a lot to what is your net dollar retention, showing more of like the long-term value of the business. What is the LTV of your customers, your CAC to LTV, your CAC payback period, especially for the product-led growth companies, and your margins. So it's more about what is the likelihood that this company will stay alive throughout an economic recession and then has the potential to accelerate post-recession.
Mm-hmm. And for everybody whose head is spinning, she's talking about customer acquisition costs and lifetime value.
Yeah, I'm living in these acronyms.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That's fine. That's fine. I just need to say those words so that, ChatGPT will spell them across the screen for us. If you were running marketing at an early stage, and I like B2B particularly, you got the limited budget, you got limited personnel. How would you, Shanee, be investing your time and your limited funds if you were trying to kick things off?
I mean, I think I've always dealt with a limited budget, no matter what size company I've worked for, from the super, super small companies that I've advised to the medium-sized companies worked at to the massive Fortune 100 companies I've worked at. So there will always be a budget limitation, and you can never do all the things you want to do. I think at the earliest stage, it really is about understanding what does the company need to get to the next chapter. And some examples of that are there are going to be some companies now that don't want VC funding. They're just bootstrapping. So the most important thing there is bringing revenue into the business that can feed the business at a low cost. There will be some companies that are seeking VC funding, and they might need to juice growth a little bit just to be able to show that to the VCs. And so they might operate a little more inefficiently.
A longer CAC payback time.
Exactly. So it really comes down to like, what kind of business is it and what do we need to do? Like if it's a consumer business, maybe it's a little bit more about how do we get in front of the right consumers. If it's a B2B business, maybe it's a little bit more about how do we position and differentiate ourselves against others in the market. There's so many things you could do, but you should only do the things that are like if you're thinking about the company's survival as like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, do the things that are as close to survival as possible. Like water. What is water for you in this moment? And focus on that.
Mm-hmm. And water is revenue, probably.
It could be. It could be. Again, it just depends on what type of business your team is trying to build.
True. I suppose there's instances where somebody might have runway for one reason or another. Maybe their runway is their time, and they'd sooner get traction in terms of users and growth, not revenue. But I think
Yeah,
revenue is water.
I've I've also seen it be like you don't even have some people don't have a product yet. They have an idea,
Right.
but they don't have a product. And if you only have limited engineering resources, you want to make sure that they're developing the right thing. And so I've seen the early stage marketing teams be more in the product marketing side, where they're going out and doing the research and talking to prospective customers to help inform the product roadmap of what they need for that kind of MVP thing.
Before they build anything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Are there any specific channels that you're hearing about right now that people are achieving success with? I talk about this stuff all the time. There's trends like cold email's not working, or like B2B businesses on TikTok, and it's like there's any number of things that are hot at any given moment. Is there anything that's catching your eye that you think people should at least take a look at if it's relevant to them?
I think it comes down to whether you're like which audience you're selling to and where those people are located. Like if you do have a business where your buyers are on TikTok, I could see some value there, but I would question which businesses actually have their buyers on TikTok. Something that I am noticing is along those lines of like TikTok slash influencer is corporate thought leadership is changing from being like this is coming from the voice of the company to being more about we're finding a person within the company to be that advocate and we're elevating the profile of that individual, which has been helpful for those companies because you can trust a person more than you can trust the kind of faceless entity. So like sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's a specific function lead, but I'm seeing that more and more where they're like, oh, this is our X person and they are the ones who are talking about it and we're sending them out to all the events and they're the ones who are posting the product announcements and getting all of the engagement, whereas the corporate handles are not.
I love hearing that answer because that's essentially the playbook that I've been running with my clients is that particularly in the early stage with CEOs, they are the biggest lever for growth. And so putting them out there with their thought leadership, building their profile, making it easier for them to network both digitally and in person is a terrific tactic. Their reach always grows faster than that of their company and their brand. So we just
Totally.
lean into that. Yeah.
I totally agree
Um,
with that.
yeah. Well, it's affirming because I'm building a product around that. So it's lovely to hear that, Sammy. That is also a clip. Her most recent answer. That's a clip. We want to see that on LinkedIn. I want to be tagging Shanee saying, it's thought leadership from a human being is the way to go. Shanee, how can companies, B2B SaaS companies, any tech companies, how can they get more value out of Crunchbase? And how would you advise them to better use the platform?
Yeah. I mean, there's like a little bit of my own humility in here in that Crunchbase has had this very interesting double-edged sword of a very well-known brand, but it's a limited knowledge of what the brand does. So I think a lot of people think of Crunchbase as just a founder to VC relationship tool or just a database. And over the last several years, it's expanded a lot and it's become more of like anybody who's trying to make a B2B deal, whether they're a salesperson or the entrepreneur or the VC or a BD person or M&A, can use Crunchbase. And I also think, again, there's always opportunity for us to do better from a marketing standpoint. I think there's limited knowledge of what features people can use. So some of the things that I find the most valuable is if you take more of like an account-based approach or like a company-first approach, you can find much more qualified partners or leads. So like what I like to do is say, what There's an advanced search feature. What kind of partners am I looking for? Like what industries? Are they fintech? Are they ed tech? And I'll limit the area from a category perspective. Then I'll look for what size companies I want. So you can choose like Series A through Series, post IPO venture debt kind of company. And then I look for growth signals. So we have things like, have they done a layoff in the last X months? Are they actively hiring? Did they recently get funding? And so I look for all of these health signals that tell me this is a company that I could partner with or might be interested in me. And then there's a lookalike feature. It's like, show me companies that look like X company. So one of the things that I advise my startup kind of advisory clients is look for VCs who have invested in your competitors, because for the larger VCs, they often try to own a thesis, which means they're not afraid to invest in companies that are in the same space. But then once I do all of that, then I get like this short list of very qualified companies. And then I start digging into their profiles and looking for like what's recent news that was written about them and see like, is there something that would trigger me to want to reach out or not? And then I like to make a list so I can like save them all to a list, and then Crunchbase will automatically send me a notification if there's any material changes. So it's all about like the right company, the right time. So those notifications let me know like, okay, now's a good time for us to reach out versus, ooh, they just did a layoff. Now is a bad time to reach out. And then I think one of the things that I've seen most people don't know Crunchbase has at this point is contact data. So we now have contact data in the platform. So you can also find, once you have the right companies, you can find the right decision maker at that company, and either get to their LinkedIn or their email, so that you can reach out when they are qualified. There's like more sophisticated stuff, like some people use CRM integration. You can see what's in your Salesforce already versus not inside of Crunchbase and who on your team has reached out and when. But those initial things I think are more for that early stage company. If you're looking for VC funding, start at the level of they're in your category, they're actively investing, they've invested in some of your competitors. Or another thing I've seen people do is look for the competitors of the VCs that have invested in your competitors. So like you captured their FOMO, their fear of missing out for ChatGPT. So there's just a lot of ways that you can click through the data. It's very networked, sort of like the way LinkedIn is.
That is a fantastic response and a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. I mean, even just doing competitor research with that lookalike feature sounds like a great place to start.
Yeah.
Let alone when you're pursuing funding. That's terrific stuff. Shanee, I am so grateful that you took the time to be a part of my humble little podcast. I want to give people, if people want to reach out and connect with you, should they follow you on LinkedIn, or how do we get in touch with Shanee?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn, Shanee Ben-Zur. Feel free to either follow or send a request. I'm happy to connect. And like, if you are an early stage company that's looking for more of that kind of advisory support, definitely check out Hatchet.
Wow. I am so thankful. This has been excellent. I've had the CMO of Crunchbase on my podcast. I feel like I've made it. This humble little podcast, we're making things happen over here. Shanee, thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Jordan, to my longest running internet pen pal. It has been I feel like I've made it.
Wow. Hey, and if you do connect with Shanee, I mean, it could be lasting friendship, could be, 17, 18 years running, having never met in person and yet still had the kind of friendship where you call her up and she'll show up on your podcast for you. Thanks again, Shanee. Take care.
Thank you.